I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. And this is Currents. History was made last night as a Brooklyn priest moved closer to sainthood.
He would be the first saint in the Diocese of Brooklyn.
We go into the deep with Bishop DiMarzio to talk about what vocations mean to today's priests.
We've got to do the best we can to attract people to vocations.
And meet the Brooklyn men who are about to become priests.
I look forward to the day in which I'm able to celebrate the Eucharist and to bring Jesus to those entrusted to me.
Well, good evening and thank you so much for joining us. Last night was an historic one for the Brooklyn Diocese. For the first time, it formally opened an inquiry into whether one of its own should be a saint.
The man who may one day be canonized is Monsignor Bernard Quinn, an early leader in the civil rights movement here in the U.S. He founded the first Catholic church in Brooklyn to minister to blacks.
We sent our cameras to that church, St. Peter Claver in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, where the current pastor explained the significance of the occasion.
We are having the opening session of the inquiry for the canonization of Monsignor Bernard J. Quinn. We are certainly very proud of him because he would be the first saint in the Diocese of Brooklyn. After the various persons have taken their oath, they will then go to work in studying the evidence. And then we will send all the evidence to Rome.
This church is rich in history, and the life of Monsignor Quinn pretty much typifies what this church and its mission statement has been about throughout the decades. He's the pastor that founded the church. It was primarily a church for minorities. He began the orphanage at Wading River, Little Flower. It was an orphanage for black children because as it stood in the 1920s, there was no institution set up primarily for their care.
Father Quinn was a great influence in bringing together the two races, black people and white people in Brooklyn. And because of racism, again, my uncle could not become a priest, which he wanted to be so much, but he was not accepted in the seminaries. So that again was an effort on the part of Father Quinn, who established the brotherhood. That is my uncle, who was a brother with Father Quinn. These are some of the things we would be demonstrating through historical records. We're planning a pilgrimage to France to retrace the steps of Father Quinn when he was a young priest in the military.
Of Monsignor Quinn in life.
We're very fortunate to have the bishop giving testimony.
Just about a year ago, this time, I had just begun convalescing from quadruple bypass surgery. Blood clots were threatening my life, but somehow there came to me this image of Monsignor Quinn. It is my personal testimony to his sanctity. Why he came to my mind at that time, I'll never know. And from that day on, and through the healing that I received, I do not know if it was miraculous, but I do know somehow Monsignor Quinn had something to do with it.
Well, I think he represents the best of Brooklyn, where we're a multi-ethnic diocese, where he works so hard to establish racial harmony, to eliminate racism. These are the things that we still struggle with today. Taking care of orphans, even in the midst of having the orphanage burned down twice by the Ku Klux Klan, not once but twice, and he rebuilt it again. And the third time when he put his foot down, and I think he kind of threatened them a bit, I don't know how, but he kind of said no more, and it never happened again.
And it's really good to see that there's something positive happening here in Bedford-Stuyvesant that we can all be a part of. You don't have to go all the way to France to pay homage to relics. You have places right here. So that's a good thing.
So amazing there. And another amazing, probably little known fact about that church, St. Peter Claver, that is where Lena Horne got her start performing. She performed there in the church choir at St. Peter Claver. So,
wow, such an amazing singer.
yeah, it's where it all started for her.
Well, we will be sure to bring you updates on Monsignor Quinn's path to sainthood as this story develops, and we have much more about him on our website. Just go to currentsny.net.
Stay tuned, though. There's more Currents coming up straight ahead. When we return, we'll have the day's headlines, including freedom for a Cuban dissident, thanks in part to a Catholic cardinal.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Coming up in just a bit, we'll introduce you to the 3 men who are about to be ordained as Brooklyn's newest priests.
But first, let's turn to the day's headlines. True surprise and indignation. Those are the words the Vatican used to describe its reaction to how Belgian police handled a raid on Catholic Church offices this week. Investigators in Belgium are looking into allegations of clergy sex abuse in the Archdiocese of Brussels. Earlier this week, officers searched the offices of former Archbishop Godfried de Niels. They seized documents and a computer, but did not say if the former prelate had been personally accused of abuse. The Vatican said in a statement the raid was not a pleasant experience and expressed indignation for what it called the violation of 2 late cardinals' tombs during the search. Cuban authorities released a political activist from prison this week after court officials waited almost a year to bring him to trial. His release comes following a visit from a high-ranking Vatican official at a meeting between President Raul Castro and the island nation's Catholic cardinal. As CNN's David Ariosto reports, many Cubans are wondering if conditions for political prisoners will continue to improve.
Para mí fuera algo muy bueno.
Freedom for Cuban dissident Darcy Ferrer. After 11 months of waiting in prison, the Cuban authorities finally decided to take me to trial, he said, and after they set me free. Separated from his wife and child, Ferrer was charged in a Cuban court with illegally purchasing black market cement. Then he was allowed to go home. It's very emotional for our family, said Ferrer's wife Yusnami, especially for our 8-year-old boy. Ferrer will serve the last 4 months of his sentence under house arrest.
Es muy significativo todo esto.
It means a lot to be back with family and friends, he said. The sad thing is to know about the people I left behind who are still suffering in Cuban prisons. Critics say his imprisonment was excessive for a common practice often ignored or punished by a small fine. Its motive, they say, was therefore political. The entire Cuban population buys black market goods, said Cuban economist and dissident Oscar Espinosa Chepe. There's just not things available here to buy legally. While the Cuban government was not immediately available for comment, it commonly enforces even minor infractions of the law. Authorities here say there are no political prisoners here in Cuba. Ferrer's release follows a visit from a top Vatican official and a rare meeting between President Raul Castro and the island's Roman Catholic cardinal.
We know that the Cuban government does not respond well to external pressure. What Cardinal Ortega and the Catholic bishops seem to have done is to find a way to engage in a respectful dialogue with the Cuban government and the Cuban government to accept that. And it's about real issues such as human rights.
An example, a series of prisoner transfers to jails closer to their homes, and now the release of Ferrer has many here in Cuba hoping that the government will follow through on a deal it made with this country's Catholic Church to improve human rights.
And that is CNN's David Ariosto. Well, closer to home, the ex-husband of a New Jersey Catholic school teacher found stabbed to death last week has been arrested. 63-year-old Anthony Novellino, who police call a person of interest in the case, was arrested at a motel in Washington State early this morning. Judith Novellino was found dead Saturday in her Denville, New Jersey home with more than 80 stab wounds. She taught English and French classes at Morris Catholic High School for 20 years.
The Kings County District Attorney's Office will not file charges against the president of Bishop Ford Catholic High School. DA Charles Hines cleared Ray Nash of any wrongdoing this week for taking more than $50,000 from a school development fund and giving that money to his son. Hines said Nash had no criminal intent and was trying to save his son's home from foreclosure. Ray Nash's son, Peter Nash, is better known as Prime Minister Pete Nice of the hip-hop group Third Base. Well, school leaders in a Massachusetts town recently approved a policy that would make condoms available to elementary school students, and pro-family groups are up in arms. School nurses in Provincetown are required to provide a condom to a student if he or she asks for it. The president of the Massachusetts Family Institute called that policy radical in a statement and said it promotes sexual promiscuity to innocent children. The protocol states Provincetown schools do not condone sexual activity among students. Still, Governor Deval Patrick said the school board should change that policy, and officials said it would be reviewed in a future meeting. And finally, today marks the one-year anniversary of the death of actress Farrah Fawcett. Fawcett was a Roman Catholic and 70s beauty icon, best known for her time on the TV show Charlie's Angels. She died after a long battle with cancer, June 25, 2009. Her battle included traveling to Germany to seek alternative cancer treatments not offered here in the U.S. Now, Fawcett's death was the top news story for just a few hours. It was quickly overshadowed by news that the self-proclaimed king of pop, Michael Jackson, had died. Jackson was 50 years old and was getting ready for several comeback concerts in London. An attorney for Jackson's father says Joe Jackson will file a wrongful death lawsuit against Dr. Conrad Murray, who is charged in Jackson's death.
Stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up. Just ahead, just before a big weekend for the church in Brooklyn, Bishop DiMarzio tells us what it's all about.
They want to have this relationship with God. They believe in God, but they have to find a way to express it.
Welcome back. Well, this is a big weekend for the Diocese of Brooklyn. Tomorrow, Bishop DiMarzio will ordain 3 men to the priesthood.
And the priesthood is the topic of tonight's discussion with the bishop as we head into the deep to talk with him about vocations.
Bishop, thank you so much for joining us here today on Currents.
Good to be here today again.
Always a pleasure to see you. We've talked a lot on the show about vocations, over the last several months, over the last year, basically. Talk to us a little bit now how the situation of vocations is in the Diocese of Brooklyn.
Well, I'm encouraged. I think we're making some progress. When I came to the diocese 6 years ago, we had 28 seminarians. As of today, we have 52. We've ordained 20 priests in these 6 years. So there's some positive movement. It's not like we're going backwards. Is there enough for the future? No. And I think the Lord told us, pray the Lord of the harvest so that there will be sufficient and never sufficient workers in the vineyard. So I think that the Lord himself warned us about that. There's never going to be enough. But we've got to do the best we can to attract people to vocations, men and women, for the religious vocations that are full-time, that are complete commitment in the church.
We did not all that long ago a profile of the Pope John Paul II House of Discernment, which seems to be a nice tool where young men can go to maybe discern a call. What are some other tools and other different ways that the diocese is encouraging vocations right now?
Well, we do have our what we call prep seminary. This is a high school where young men, if they wish to consider a vocation, can go there and be assured that they're going to be supported. Not everybody who walks in the door is going to walk out into a higher level of seminary, but at least the atmosphere is there. That's the one major commitment we do have. Secondly, we look at discernment groups, which can happen at any place, in other high schools, where people can come and talk about vocations, because there's a lot of lack of information. I wouldn't say a lot of misinformation, but it's a lack of information about, well, what does a priest do? What's this life about? Maybe I'm called to it. So we need to have a forum in which they can ask questions. One of the other major things we do is called Project Andrew, where young men come and meet with me as bishop, and we speak about vocations. Usually they're brought by somebody else. We call it Project Andrew because Andrew is the one who introduced Peter to Jesus. So there's somebody that kind of guides them to say, well, why don't you go to this session and see what's happening? So that's another thing we're doing. There are many things we've asked the parishes, each parish to have a vocation committee so that they can identify young people that might have a vocation, and most of all, pray for vocations, because that's the most important thing we can do, because we can't give anybody a vocation.
Sure.
It's the Lord that gives it. We have to discover it.
And along those lines, there are a lot of people that seem to be called in other parts of the country. There seems to be an uptick in vocations, and we've talked a little bit about that. To what might you attribute that, or do you see it happening perhaps up here as well?
I think there is a trend for increased responsiveness to vocations, especially people at a little bit of a younger age. It's a societal trend also, because it used to be that people went to college 4, maybe 5 years, then decided what major they wanted or what they wanted to do. Today,
I'm guilty of that.
The young people, the young people today are a little bit more focused. They go into college and say, I want to finish in 4 years and this is what I want. So they're more determined. So that's helpful to us because there's a different attitude and a little bit more pointed in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a positive. And so we're benefiting from that also. But I do think they call the millennials. There was a study that just was recently completed by the Pew Foundation on the millennials and religion. And I had a chance to read it. And you do see certain trends that are go beyond any one religious group. This is a generation that has searching for religious values, not so much religion and practice all the time. But there is a real adherence to religious values, which is something we have to capitalize on because they're searching. They want to have this relationship with God. They believe in God, maybe even more than the previous generation, but they have to find a way to express it. So we're trying to capitalize on that.
Nice.
Well, very good. Well, thank you so much, Bishop DiMarzio, for being here today. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Thanks. It's so nice to hear positive news. We talk about the vocations crisis so much. It's nice to hear some good news.
Well, there's some really good opportunities, like he said, the prep seminary and stuff, where you can really, get into the vocation. You know, you can see whether or not it's something that's really the right thing for you. And it's interesting, he was talking too about the millennials. I love it. We're coining new terms here as we go, but I guess there's new generations every generation.
That's right. That's right. And their attitudes and things, of course, it ebbs and flows among the generations. But yeah, that study, is showing that more and more of this younger generation now are looking for answers and faith-based answers to a lot of their questions. So we'll have more on this subject coming up actually here in just a moment. So stay with us. When we return, the men being ordained this weekend talk about their vocations.
Christ has chosen your hands, and that from your hands he seeks to grow closer and to enter into the lives of his people.
We just heard Bishop DiMarzio go into the deep on the subject of vocations, and now we're gonna go just a little bit deeper. You're about to meet 3 men whose lives will be changed forever this weekend. They're going to be ordained on Saturday as priests for the Diocese of Brooklyn.
We wanted to get a sense of who they are and what drew them to the priesthood. So tonight, we offer a special eyewitness from the deacons who tomorrow will be priests.
I entered the seminary right after high school. So I can remember all my friends talking about the colleges that they were going to go to, and then me telling my friends, hey, you know what, I'm going to go to the seminary, and I'm going to live at the seminary, and I'm going to go to St. John's University. And I can remember some of them being very taken back by that. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, you seem so normal.
One of the formative experiences of my life was starting to be an altar boy. And every morning coming into the church in the morning, we would say prayers and get set up at school, and then 9 o'clock, the altar boy, whoever was on that day, would come into the sacristy and to serve Mass.
It was not easy. I met people who tried to say, what do you want to be a priest? It's nothing. Look at your classmates. Some of them in Haiti get married, they have children, they got money. I said, yes, that's true, but give my life to serve God.
I grew up in a very loving home and a very faith-filled home. Being the only child, especially, obviously there's a lot of attention on you. Some of my earliest memories, praying with my mother, praying with my father, having grace before meals. And I remember distinctly the first time I served Mass, especially on this altar actually, and it was just an amazing time. It was with an elderly Italian priest. It impressed upon me the nature, the solemn nature, and the sense of entering into the holy.
I attended a Baptist school. Haiti is a soccer country. We play a lot of soccer everywhere. And my school went to play against the Catholic school in my hometown. Father Paul Messis spoke with me about his desire for me to come to his school. I began to serve as an altar server.
I remember my confirmation as if it were yesterday. Bishop Gerald Barbarito, who is now the Bishop of Palm Beach, was the auxiliary bishop of Brooklyn, and he confirmed me. And in his homily, he preached about the joy of the priesthood and how happy he was as a priest. I could remember sitting in that pew in my parish saying to myself, wow, I want to be a happy, smiling, joyful priest.
At some point, being an only child, the question would come, well, don't you want to give your family grandchildren? And the only real response I think any of us have to those types of questions is to live out our priesthood in a positive, serious, and joyful manner. Because for us, who are called to be priests, we found it's the pearl of great price. The priesthood today is so countercultural.
I have a twin niece and nephew, and I worry about them all the time because they're going to grow up in the world in a society that is just so anti-Christian.
But it's also one of the main roles of the priesthood today. You give testimony by your very life in the midst of a world that oftentimes doesn't understand who you are.
In New York, especially in Brooklyn and Queens, there is a big need for priests. I always send this message to the young people to think about religious life.
The joys of the priesthood, first and foremost, has to be in the sacraments.
I look forward to the day in which I'm able to celebrate the Eucharist and to bring Jesus to those entrusted to me.
Christ has chosen your hands, and that from your hands, he seeks to grow closer and to enter into the lives of his people.
I feel good. I feel confident that God has called me to this vocation. I'm excited. I'm nervous, of course, and I look forward to serving the people of God in any way possible.
It's obviously an extremely blessed and gifted time to know that you are entering into the very mystery, the very thing that you've been preparing, and in my case, for 7 years.
But I will not cry at my ordination. I will laugh because I am waiting a long time for this day.
I love it.
They're just so happy and they're so enthusiastic and really looking forward to executing their calling. It's just terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. With Alonzo Cox, who you saw there, Deacon Alonzo Cox now, soon to be Father Alonzo Cox. He was an early guest here on the show back last summer. He was here in studio and we were talking about the Year for Priests, which just wrapped up not so long ago, and he was telling me a little bit about his story then and how he knew from a very young age that he wanted that he had a calling to be a priest. He had that desire within him, and he felt that calling from God. So it's so interesting to see his story as juxtaposed to the other stories of the one from Haiti and the other one who had this great family life growing up. Everybody's got a different story, but they're all going now to that same place of being in the priesthood and being ministers on Saturday.
And I love how Father Jean-Francois, or soon to be,
right.
Was on the soccer field.
Yeah.
He got yanked from the Baptist school into the Catholic school when he was playing football, you know. So you never know when you're going to get called, or where for that matter. But
the old adage, the Lord works in mysterious ways.
That's right. You might have your cleats on.
Right, exactly. There you go. Well, our congratulations do definitely go out to those men. Of course, our prayers as well. Father Cox, Father Bruno, and Father Jean-Francois, soon to be those titles there. And of course, we'll have full coverage of the ordinations coming up on Monday's edition of the show.
We will. Meantime, remember, you can always catch us online at currentsny.net. You can also check out our Facebook page. Until next time, I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night and a great weekend.